At this moment, the United States has entered uncharted territory that no president, no court, and no Congress has ever crossed before. A federal judge has taken a step unprecedented in American history. While a federal criminal trial remained actively in progress, the judge directly forwarded impeachment evidence to the United States Congress. Not a summary, not an analysis, not a suggestion, the raw evidence itself. This never occurred during Watergate. It did not happen with Nixon. It did not occur during Clinton's proceedings. It has never taken place until now. Tonight, Washington is responding as though it fully grasps the gravity of this development. National Guard units are being positioned around the Capitol. Security barriers are being erected. Lawmakers are receiving briefings in secure, closed sessions. The political machinery is shifting into emergency mode. This is not ordinary politics. This is not cable news theater. This is the constitutional framework responding under extraordinary pressure. Just hours before this extraordinary judicial transmission, another stunning event unfolded that stunned even seasoned courtroom observers. Federal marshals physically escorted Donald Trump's complete legal team out of a federal courtroom, in plain sight of cameras, on grounds of perjury. Let that sink in. Not mere misconduct, not breaches of decorum, perjury under oath. Rather than simply proceeding with the trial, the judge chose escalation. He made a ruling that immediately shattered the timelines presidents have long depended on. Delay has vanished. Stalling tactics are over. The timetable is now dictated by the judiciary, not political maneuvering. If tonight everything suddenly feels profoundly different, this is the reason. When a federal judge transmits impeachment evidence to Congress amid an ongoing trial, it conveys one unmistakable message. The behavior is so egregious that the usual separation of powers can no longer contain it. And this is merely the initial action. In the coming 72 hours, Congress will face intense pressure to respond. Alliances will splinter, new evidence will emerge, and strain will mount on institutions that seldom confront such stark crises. Stay tuned, because what follows reveals why impeachment has shifted from speculation to reality, why Washington is bracing for turbulence, and why the next 3 days could fundamentally reshape the presidency. Before we continue, ensure you're subscribed. This situation is evolving rapidly, intensifying by the hour, and the developments ahead will not pause. What unfolded in that federal courtroom was not disorder or chaos. It was deliberate enforcement. That difference is critical. When federal marshals advanced on Donald Trump's legal team, it was not an impulsive move. It marked the culmination of a process that had reached its breaking point. The judge had issued warnings, multiple times, as the record clearly shows. Under oath, Trump's attorneys repeatedly denied the existence of certain emails. Not once or twice, but 17 distinct times. They assured the court those communications were non-existent. They told the judge no records existed. They told the jury there was nothing to examine. Yet the evidence already in the court's possession told a different story. Emails, metadata, financial documents directly contradicted those sworn denials. When the judge confronted the defense, no explanation followed, no retraction, no effort to retract the statements. The falsehoods persisted. At that point, the trial did not simply halt, it pivoted. The judge determined that the defense had crossed from legitimate advocacy into criminal territory. Perjury is not a strategic misstep. It is a felony. Thus, the command was issued. Federal marshals approached the defense table. They directed Trump's attorneys to rise. They were led out of the courtroom, not discreetly, not in private, but openly, before the cameras, the jury, and the public. This was not symbolic. It was the enforcement of court procedure. Here is where the situation turns most perilous. Rather than merely appointing replacement counsel and resuming the trial, the judge took an action no federal judge has ever taken in real time. He paused, evaluated, and escalated. Because the court now confronted not only perjury, but obstruction of justice linked directly to a sitting president. When attorneys provide false testimony under oath to protect a client, the court must assess whether that action was instructed, coordinated, or part of a larger scheme to undermine judicial authority. Those issues cannot be dismissed. In that instant, the courtroom transformed from a mere trial venue into the flashpoint for a constitutional crisis. And this is the key point to grasp. Judges are conditioned to steer clear of politics at any cost. They only escalate when they conclude that the system itself faces serious compromise. That line was decisively crossed inside that courtroom. And if you believe the story concludes with a few lawyers being escorted out, you are overlooking what is unfolding next. Once a court concludes that perjury and obstruction may be linked to executive direction, the judiciary is no longer permitted to remain passive. Stay with me. The judge's subsequent action fundamentally altered the trajectory. If you want to grasp how a single courtroom development detonated into a full-scale national crisis, make sure you are subscribed, because the events that followed are precisely why Washington is now functioning in emergency mode. What happened immediately afterward was the moment the dam broke. After the courtroom was cleared and the defense team removed, the judge did not adjourn for the day. He did not summon replacement counsel. He did not simply proceed. Instead, he issued a formal judicial order whose wording was incendiary. In that order, the judge explicitly declared that the obstruction of justice and perjury committed in his courtroom constituted impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors. Not in theory, not in the abstract, but in direct connection with the conduct unfolding before him. Then came the sentence that reverberated across Washington. Congressional transmission was now complete. That language is not flourish. It is legal procedure. It signifies that the court had compiled, certified, and formally delivered the full body of evidence directly to the House of Representatives to initiate impeachment proceedings. Not a digest, not a referral note, the complete package. The materials included full courtroom transcripts capturing 17 distinct instances of sworn falsehoods. The very emails the defense insisted never existed, among them a $40 million Saudi-linked payment referenced in correspondence that flatly contradicted testimony under oath. Authenticated body camera footage of federal marshals removing Trump's legal team, and sealed audio recordings never intended for public release. One recording captured Donald Trump directing associates to disregard court orders. Another recorded him issuing threats against judges. These were not unauthorized leaks or journalistic exclusives. They were admitted exhibits, properly sealed, indexed, and transmitted straight to the House Judiciary Committee. Nothing like this has ever occurred. During Watergate, Congress led the investigation. With Nixon, the courts exercised restraint. During Clinton, the political branches managed accountability. Here, the judiciary inserted itself directly into the constitutional process and declared, "This conduct cannot be deferred." That choice outweighs any individual piece of evidence. Federal courts do not take such steps unless they determine that further delay itself threatens the integrity of the rule of law. For decades, presidents have outlasted scandals by running out the clock, litigate, appeal, delay, wait for attention to dissipate. That strategy has now been eliminated. By transmitting impeachment-grade evidence in the middle of an active trial, the judge compressed timelines that typically span years into mere days. Congress is no longer guided by political expediency. It is now governed by a judicial deadline. Once that clock begins ticking, it does not stop for rallies, polls, or intimidation. If you are wondering why lawmakers suddenly appear rattled, this is the reason. If you are wondering why security measures are intensifying throughout Washington, this is why. When a federal judge certifies that impeachable conduct is fully documented and transmission is complete, the constitutional machinery is compelled to respond. Stay tuned. The next segment explains why Congress was already primed for this moment and why impeachment did not begin yesterday. And before you leave, subscribe. You are witnessing a constitutional process unfold in real time. Here is the aspect many are only now beginning to recognize. The courtroom events did not invent impeachment. They activated a process that was already in place. Well before the judge forwarded his evidence, a House impeachment resolution had been quietly prepared and held in reserve. not hastily drafted, not knee-jerk, but fully formed and dormant. House Resolution 2353 contained 7 meticulously drafted articles, legally rigorous and ready for precisely this kind of trigger. Those articles were neither vague nor symbolic. They were precise and grave: bribery linked to emoluments, clause violations, abuse of power through misuse of executive authority, obstruction of justice, contempt of Congress, violation of the presidential oath, incitement, and conduct surrounding military deployment discussions. Everything shifted the instant the judge's referral arrived. By the following morning, lawmakers who had previously hedged were no longer weighing partisan optics. They were calculating personal and political exposure. Could they plausibly defend this conduct in public? Could they explain it to voters? Could they justify staying silent? With transcripts, audio recordings, and body camera footage now in existence, the answer for many became a resounding no. Names started appearing on the resolution rapidly and publicly. Republicans who had staunchly defended Trump just days earlier began adding their signatures. Some released statements, others stayed quiet. But the tally kept rising. By midday, it crossed an irreversible threshold: 220 co-sponsors. That is no longer momentum, that is a House majority. At that point, impeachment ceased to be a possibility. It became simple arithmetic. Leadership no longer needed to twist arms or broker deals. The votes were already committed on paper. This is why the atmosphere in Washington changed so abruptly. When the numbers solidify, further delay turns hazardous. And here the process accelerates. House rules include a provision for precisely these moments, when leadership concludes that postponement itself endangers the nation. That provision has now been activated. Stay with me. The next part explains why the timeline is now counted in hours rather than weeks. If you want to see how quickly this is accelerating and why no escape route may remain, make sure you are subscribed. You are witnessing a system lock into motion once the math is undeniable. This marks the moment the Republican Party fractured openly, not in whispers or anonymous sourcing, but through names, signatures, and irreversible public statements. Until this point, many Republican lawmakers had relied on a time-tested playbook: wait it out, deflect questions, challenge motives, and avoid firm commitments. That approach disintegrated the instant the judge's evidence package arrived, because the issue was no longer about protecting a president. It was about defending the indefensible. The recordings erased any room for ambiguity. The transcripts stripped away deniability. The visual of Trump's attorneys being physically removed from the courtroom for perjury demolished the final rhetorical shield. You cannot spin that on cable news. You cannot wave it off as partisan overreach. You cannot call it a misunderstanding. Republican lawmakers grasped this instantly. Then the defections began, not from marginal voices, but from figures who had repeatedly and publicly stood by Trump. Some held press conferences, some issued brief statements, some simply added their names to the resolution without comment. The signal, however, was clear and consistent: resign or be removed, unfit for command, this cannot stand. When members of the president's own party begin deploying that kind of language, it indicates more than policy disagreement. It signals alarm. Alarm about the mounting evidence. Alarm about guilt by association. Alarm about standing alone beside a crumbling edifice. Lawmakers are experts at reading political risk. They know when the ground beneath them is shifting. And what they saw was stark. Each new piece of evidence made continued defense riskier than breaking ranks. Every hour of silence heightened personal liability. Every attempt to minimize the crisis was immediately refuted by court-certified documentation. This is how loyalty fractures, not gradually but swiftly. Behind closed doors, the conversations grow brutally direct. Can you defend this in a campaign spot? Can you justify it under oath? Can you explain why you remained loyal while judges were threatened and court orders were defied? For many, the honest answer was no. And once defections start, they do not reverse. Others join not because their core views have flipped overnight, but because political survival requires alignment with undeniable reality. That is why the list continues to lengthen. That is why party leadership is in disarray. That is why the president's inner circle is contracting by the hour. If you believe this is fundamentally about ideology, you are missing the core dynamic. This is about self-preservation. Stay with me, because as Republicans jump ship inside Congress, the president's own response is dramatically worsening his legal jeopardy. And before you leave, subscribe. You are watching a political collapse unfold live. The next phase is where restraint vanishes entirely. As Congress begins to act, the president is doing the single thing guaranteed to make the situation far worse. He cannot stop posting. Since the judicial referral reached the Hill, Donald Trump has been flooding social media non-stop. Not careful rebuttals or calibrated messages, full-throated rants in all caps, personal insults, hoax claims, layered conspiracy theories, and outright threats. At first it might seem like vintage Trump behavior under pressure, but the context has changed completely. Every post is now preserved evidence. Every message carries a timestamp. When a president attacks sitting judges during active judicial proceedings, it crosses from rhetoric into potential witness intimidation. When a president urges defiance of Congress carrying out its constitutional duty, it crosses from free speech into potential incitement. And then came the post that triggered red alerts throughout Washington. A direct warning of civil war if Congress proceeds with removal. That sentence carries extraordinary weight. A sitting president issuing a public threat of civil war in direct response to impeachment proceedings is not mere political exaggeration. It crosses a bright red line. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies do not treat such statements as casual opinions. They treat them as operational signals. That is precisely why extremist communications are now under heightened monitoring. That is why the security posture across the Capitol shifted overnight. That is why contingency protocols are being activated at multiple levels. Even Trump's closest allies recognize this shift, though few will admit it openly. They are observing his conduct evolve from calculated defiance to increasingly erratic and destabilizing behavior. The risk is no longer purely political. It has become legal as well. From a prosecutorial standpoint, Trump is constructing a record that could scarcely be more damaging if scripted by his adversaries. Attacks on judges fortify obstruction of justice charges. Public calls to resist congressional authority strengthen contempt allegations. Apocalyptic rhetoric bolsters claims of mental instability and unfitness for office. He is not mounting a defense. He is narrating his own incrimination in real time. This is what institutional unraveling looks like when it happens live. A president who once thrived on ambiguity now generates unmistakable clarity. One who once mastered delay now accelerates irreversible consequences. Washington is watching and reacting accordingly. Behind closed doors, senior officials are no longer debating whether escalation will continue. They are planning on the firm assumption that it will. Restraint has evaporated. Patience has vanished. Institutions are hardening their positions rather than hesitating. Stay with me, because Trump's actions are not occurring in isolation. They are the direct catalyst for why the Capitol is now in lockdown, why National Guard units have been deployed, and why the crisis is shifting from verbal confrontation to institutional readiness. And before we continue, make sure you are subscribed. You are witnessing the moment when words cease to be background noise and begin functioning as active triggers. Washington is no longer functioning under routine conditions. This is not a drill. This is not symbolic posturing. National Guard contingents are positioned throughout the Capitol. Barricades are rising around critical federal buildings. Security perimeters continue to expand hour by hour. Law enforcement visibility is pervasive. Officials are not responding to existing protests. They are responding to assessed risk. On the ground, two polarized Americas are coalescing in real time. Pro-Trump gatherings chanting about persecution and stolen authority. Anti-Trump crowds insisting on swift enforcement of the rule of law. This is not a standard rally atmosphere. It is a high-pressure environment. Authorities carry vivid institutional memory of what happens when inflammatory rhetoric is left unchecked. January 6th is not distant history. It is active operational doctrine. The response is therefore multi-layered. Visible uniformed presence for deterrence, intelligence surveillance for early coordination, rapid response teams on standby. The objective is prevention, not provocation. Inside official Washington, the prevailing description is tense but disciplined. No widespread panic, no disarray, only deliberate preparation. Members of Congress receive updated movement and security protocols. Staff are directed toward remote work, where feasible. Emergency continuity plans are under active review. This is what serious threat assessment looks like in practice. Make no mistake, officials are treating the president's statements as part of a credible threat environment, not out of desire to escalate, but because failing to prepare would constitute dereliction of duty. That explains the abrupt shift in tone. Zero tolerance for further delay, zero patience for ambiguity, zero margin for misjudgment. The system is in brace position. Stay with me. While the exterior of Washington hardens, an equally grave development is unfolding internally. Multiple concurrent pathways toward removal are now in motion simultaneously. Impeachment is merely one vector, and before you move on, subscribe. You are watching a national crisis transition from conceptual debate to concrete operational readiness. The next segment reveals why Trump is now encircled on every front. At this juncture, one reality is paramount. Donald Trump no longer confronts a solitary threat. He faces several independent mechanisms of accountability, advancing in parallel, none of which depend on his participation or consent. The first remains impeachment. That channel is now live, accelerated by judicial timeline, and constitutionally automatic. Should the House approve articles, the Senate trial follows as a mandated proceeding, not optional, not mood-dependent. The Chief Justice presides. Evidence is formally introduced. Witnesses may be compelled. Sworn testimony enters the permanent public record. Even absent numerical conviction, the exposure is total and irreversible. But impeachment constitutes only one track. Running parallel are active criminal investigations. The evidence package transmitted to Congress was simultaneously routed to federal prosecutors. Perjury, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation. If prosecutors can prove that Trump instructed his attorneys to provide false testimony under oath, that constitutes suborning perjury, a serious felony. If court orders were deliberately disregarded on his directive, that amounts to obstruction of justice, another felony. These criminal tracks do not halt for impeachment proceedings. Federal courts do not defer to political calendars. Grand juries do not adjourn because a president expresses outrage. Then there is the mechanism few wanted to mention openly, but can no longer avoid: the 25th Amendment. Reports indicate discreet discussions are underway between the vice president and select cabinet members, not about policy disagreements, but about functional capacity. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment permits removal without House articles or Senate trial if the president is determined unable to discharge the duties of the office. The process can unfold rapidly, potentially overnight. Trump could contest it, triggering a congressional decision. Given the momentum of impeachment and the mounting evidence, the outcome would likely be decisive. The mere fact that this avenue is under serious consideration reveals the depth of the current crisis. These pathways are not staged sequentially. They are converging in parallel. Congressional accountability, criminal liability, constitutional incapacity. Trump is now surrounded on all sides. No single maneuver can halt every track simultaneously. No delay tactic can freeze them all. That explains why Washington's posture has stiffened so decisively. Patience has run out. Officials recognize that converging consequences dramatically heighten instability. Stay with me, because the next phase compresses the entire timeline into an extremely narrow window. 72 hours. A countdown that cannot be suspended. And before we continue, subscribe. What unfolds next replaces speculation with inevitability. Everything has now coalesced around one figure: 72 hours. That is the remaining time before the House of Representatives is compelled to act. This is not advisory. It is a binding procedural rule, specifically engineered for situations in which congressional leadership concludes that further delay itself endangers national stability. That rule has been formally invoked. Once activated, discretion evaporates. There is no option to slow roll, no space for private negotiations. The clock begins ticking and does not pause. This is why the mood in Washington feels fundamentally altered. Politics has been supplanted by inexorable timing. Lawmakers are no longer debating the wisdom of impeachment. They are preparing for a vote that will occur regardless of individual preference. The arithmetic is already fixed on the record. 220 co-sponsors represent a public majority. Even without one more signature, impeachment passes. That fact instantly rewires behavior. Those who once waited to read the political winds are now racing against the deadline. Defections accelerate not because convictions have suddenly shifted, but because prolonged hesitation elevates personal and political risk. Every passing hour produces fresh public statements. Every hour surfaces additional evidence. Every hour intensifies pressure on the remaining holdouts. Silence itself is becoming a visible liability. For the president, time has ceased to be protective. It has become the primary instrument arrayed against him. Each social media post enlarges the evidentiary record. Each escalation strengthens the legal case. Each attempt at intimidation solidifies institutional determination. There is no reset button. The next 3 days are not merely a prelude to a vote. They represent a critical interval during which new evidence may emerge, more Republicans may break ranks, and further criminal exposure may crystallize. This is why key officials are operating on minimal sleep. This is why security remains at elevated levels. This is why contingency plans undergo hourly review. Because the moment the House gavels into session, ambiguity vanishes. Stay with me. The final section explains why, regardless of the Senate's eventual vote, this presidency cannot emerge intact from this juncture. And before you leave, subscribe. The countdown is active, and the resolution will redefine the exercise of American power. When the House ultimately convenes, the atmosphere will not feel theatrical. It will feel predestined, because by then, the result will already be determined by evidence, procedure, and elapsed time. This is the common miscalculation in moments like these. People search for a single decisive vote, a pivotal speech, one dramatic turning point. But the breakdown did not occur in an instant. It unfolded procedurally. Once impeachment shifts from hypothetical to active process, the nature of the presidency itself is transformed. Authority splinters. Leverage evaporates. Every decision faces immediate contestation. Every order invites scrutiny. Once power fractures, it does not spontaneously reassemble. Even if the Senate ultimately falls short of the 2/3 threshold for conviction, the institutional damage is permanent and irreversible. A president impeached on this scale of evidence does not reclaim sway over Congress, does not restore confidence among former allies, does not regain unencumbered operational freedom within the government. Governance becomes friction-filled. Every executive action draws legal challenge. Every directive encounters internal resistance. Every public appearance carries inherent volatility. That is why contingency mapping is underway across federal agencies, within Congress, and among international partners. Quiet scenarios are being prepared. Resignation, removal via impeachment, invocation of incapacity. This is constitutional crisis management under maximum stress on the guardrails. For generations, presidents endured scandals by running out the clock, prolonged litigation, endless appeals, fading public attention, intervening elections. That playbook ended the instant the judge transmitted impeachment-grade evidence in the midst of trial. The timetable is no longer political. It is judicial. And judicial timetables are indifferent to rallies, narratives, or threats. What remains is process, cold, methodical, unyielding. The single force Donald Trump has never succeeded in dominating. Every post becomes an exhibit. Every escalation enlarges the record. Every attempt to intimidate reinforces institutional resolve. This is not the conclusion of a narrative. It is the collapse of an illusion. The illusion that power can outrun law, that consequences can always be deferred, that authority is personal rather than constitutional. What transpires next will shape far more than one presidency. It will test whether constitutional authority still exerts real force in the United States. And that determination no longer rests with Donald Trump. It resides with the process. If you want to track developments as they unfold hour by hour, make sure you are subscribed, because once ambiguity dissolves, events accelerate, and history does not wait.